The revolution was meant to end monarchy. Instead, it created an emperor, one who would rise to unparalleled heights, only to fall just as spectacularly. How did a Corsican soldier, once a mere artillery officer, become the most powerful man in Europe, only to be exiled in disgrace? Was Napoleon Bonaparte the revolution's greatest protector, or its ultimate betrayer? This is the story of how the French Revolution devoured itself, only to give birth to a legend. France was leaderless. The reign of terror had left the nation exhausted, and with Robespierre gone, the government fell into disarray. Starvation was rampant. Riots erupted over the soaring price of bread, and veterans of the revolution found themselves unemployed and desperate. The streets of Paris, once filled with cries for liberty, now echoed with frustration and uncertainty. What remained was the Directory, a weak, corrupt five-man executive body that struggled to maintain control. The ideals of the revolution had fractured, inflation soared, political infighting crippled the government, and the people, once hungry for freedom, now simply hungered for stability. Amid this chaos, one name began to rise above the rest: Napoleon Bonaparte. At just 26 years old, he had already proven himself in battle, earning the nickname the Little Corporal from his soldiers, an affectionate title that reflected both his small stature and his extraordinary leadership, securing stunning victories against Austria in Italy. His leadership during the siege of Toulon in 1793 first brought him to prominence, and his strategic brilliance in the Italian campaigns earned him the loyalty of his soldiers and the admiration of the public. He was a war hero, a strategist like no other, and most importantly, a man who understood power. Then in 1799 opportunity struck. In the coup of 18 Brumaire, a military-led overthrow of the French government that ended the Directory and set Napoleon on his path to power, Napoleon, alongside his political allies, overthrew the Directory. In its place, he established the consulate, with himself as first consul, the real power behind the throne. France was no longer a struggling republic. It had a leader, but the question remained: was Napoleon a savior or the next dictator? Napoleon didn't just take power, he transformed France, but at a cost. With economic reforms, he stabilized France's shattered economy, creating the Bank of France to end inflation and finance growth. He also introduced a fairer tax system, replacing chaotic revolutionary taxation with a structured model based on a land registry. This system ensured that taxes were levied more equitably, with all property owners contributing, ending the unfair burden that had previously fallen on the lower classes. He centralized the government, placing loyal officials in key positions. He modernized infrastructure, improving roads, canals, and education. But perhaps his greatest legacy was the Napoleonic Code, a legal system that enshrined equality before the law, property rights, and meritocracy. It replaced the chaos of the revolution with order, and elements of it remain in legal codes around the world today. But Napoleon wanted more. In 1804, he staged a grand ceremony in Notre Dame Cathedral to crown himself Emperor of France. As he placed the crown on his own head, an observer in the crowd whispered, "The revolution is over." The act was symbolic. By taking the crown from the Pope and placing it on his own head, he sent a clear message. His power came from himself, not the church or the people. The Republic was dead. France had an emperor once more. Napoleon was not content with ruling France. He saw himself as a modern Caesar, destined to reshape Europe in his own image. His ambition knew no bounds. Every battle was a step toward an empire that would stretch from Madrid to Moscow. Through war and diplomacy, he expanded French influence across the continent. His victories at Austerlitz, 1805, and Jena, 1806, shattered Austria and Prussia, making him the master of continental Europe. Austerlitz, known as the Battle of the Three Emperors, showcased Napoleon's strategic genius as he tricked the enemy into overextending before delivering a crushing counterattack. Jena swiftly dismantled Prussian resistance, proving that traditional European armies were no match for Napoleon's modern tactics. But there was one enemy he could never break: Britain. Instead of a direct invasion, Napoleon introduced the continental system, Napoleon's economic blockade aimed at Britain, but which ultimately harmed France and its allies as well. An economic blockade designed to cripple Britain's economy. Think of it like modern economic sanctions, intended to isolate an enemy, but often with unintended consequences for both sides. The system banned trade with Britain across his empire, but it was difficult to enforce and ultimately weakened France's own economy as much as it harmed Britain's. But the plan backfired. Smuggling and British naval dominance kept their economy afloat, while European nations resented Napoleon's stranglehold over trade. Still, Napoleon's greatest mistakes were yet to come. In 1808, he invaded Spain, triggering the brutal Peninsular War. The Spanish, alongside British forces, waged a savage guerrilla campaign against French occupation. Much like modern insurgencies, their small, mobile units attacked supply lines and disappeared into the landscape, making it nearly impossible for Napoleon's forces to control the territory. This war introduced modern guerrilla tactics, with ambushes and hit-and-run attacks that bled Napoleon's forces dry and demonstrated the limitations of conventional warfare against determined resistance. Then, in 1812, Napoleon made the ultimate blunder. He invaded Russia. Expecting a quick victory, his army instead faced scorched earth tactics, a military strategy where retreating forces destroy resources to deprive the enemy of supplies, starvation, and the unforgiving Russian winter. Of the 600,000 soldiers who marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. Napoleon's empire had reached its breaking point. Defeat breeds rebellion. With France weakened, coalition forces rallied against Napoleon. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, Napoleon suffered his first major defeat, forcing him to retreat. By 1814, enemy troops marched into Paris. The once invincible emperor was forced to abdicate. In exchange for his life, he was exiled to the tiny Mediterranean island of Elba. But Napoleon was not done. In 1815, he escaped Elba, returning to France in what became known as the 100 Days. As he marched toward Paris, King Louis XVIII sent troops to arrest him. But when Napoleon approached them, he opened his coat and declared, "If any of you will shoot your emperor, do so now." Instead, the soldiers cheered and joined him. The people rallied to him once more. The monarchy trembled. His enemies reassembled their armies. And finally, in June 1815, Napoleon faced the British and Prussian forces at Waterloo. It was his last battle. Defeated, Napoleon was exiled once more, this time to the remote island of St. Helena, where he would write his memoirs and reflect on his life. His last words, as he lay on his deathbed in 1821, were, "France, the army, the head of the army, Josephine." Isolated on St. Helena, he spent his final years writing memoirs, reflecting on his victories and defeats before passing away in 1821. The emperor had fallen, but his shadow lingered over Europe, his name etched into history. He had risen beyond any ruler before him, only to be undone by his own ambition. His story was far from over, because legends never truly die. Though Napoleon was gone, his impact was everlasting. In 1815, the Congress of Vienna sought to restore the old monarchies and undo his conquests. It was the 19th century version of a post-war peace conference, similar to the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, aiming to rebuild stability while preventing future conflicts. It also established the balance of power principle, aiming to prevent any one nation from dominating Europe again. an idea that shaped diplomacy for over a century. But the ideals of the French Revolution, nationalism, legal equality, and meritocracy had spread across Europe. His Napoleonic code influenced laws worldwide. His military strategies shaped future warfare. His legend inspired leaders and revolutionaries for generations to come. France, after decades of revolution, war, and empire, would eventually settle into a constitutional monarchy and later a republic. But one truth remains: Napoleon Bonaparte was the revolution's final gambit, and in trying to control its chaos, he became the very thing it had once sought to destroy. Thank you for watching or listening to this 4-part series. If you found this deep dive into history gripping, make sure to like and subscribe. The story of Napoleon doesn't end here. His wars, his strategies, and his legend still shape the modern world. What do you think? Was Napoleon a hero of the revolution or its greatest betrayer? Let us know in the comments.